It began not with war, but with fire. In the early 1960s, as forest fires ravaged vast stretches of American wilderness, the U.S. Forest Service launched an unassuming research initiative. Its goal was straightforward: to understand how lightning ignited wildfires and how that natural force might be controlled or at least redirected. They named it Project Skyfire. But control is a dangerous ambition. Scientists launched rockets into storm clouds, each trailing conductive copper wire like a trail of bait. The idea was to lure lightning, to tame it. And it worked. The lightning followed the wire, arcing down from roiling thunderheads to targets on the ground. Some bolts struck test towers. Others hit aircraft, grounded for the experiment. For the first time in human history, lightning didn't strike at random. It struck on command. The Forest Service called it research, but the Department of Defense was already watching. Because if lightning could be summoned, it could be weaponized. There was no need to imagine exotic use cases. The possibilities were immediate. Use modified rockets to guide a bolt into enemy communications arrays, knock out radar stations, overload power grids, strike fuel convoys with surgical precision, and most importantly, deny it all. A weapon that mimicked nature left no shrapnel, no trajectory, no blame, just a thunderclap and smoke. The project soon attracted the attention of military research labs. The terminology changed. Copper wire induction became guided atmospheric discharge. Weather analysis turned into battlefield modeling. What had begun as environmental stewardship evolved into something else: quieter, better funded, and increasingly classified. By 1964, early tests suggested lightning could be directed not only into grounded objects, but also into elevated ones, like watchtowers, antennas, or even aircraft in flight. The idea of induced lightning targeting was floated in internal memos, and new platforms were developed to deliver the wire arrays with greater speed and precision. Balloons, drones, and specialized missiles were deployed in test ranges across the American West. Not all the tests were successful. Sometimes the lightning would jump unpredictably, arcing across fields or rebounding off structures. But the underlying principle held. Under the right conditions, lightning could be controlled. Then the program disappeared from public view. It wasn't shut down, it was absorbed. As Vietnam escalated, the U.S. military expanded its interest in environmental manipulation. Covert weather modification campaigns like Project Popeye used cloud seeding to prolong monsoons and flood enemy supply lines. Operation Storm Fury explored methods for disrupting tropical cyclones. The frontier wasn't just land or sea, it was atmosphere, and Project Skyfire had lit the path. By the late 1960s, documents referencing lightning control vanished from public databases, but the technology reappeared, fragmented across patents, private contracts, and unmarked military budgets. Energy weapons programs were expanding, and Skyfire's groundwork, controlled electrical discharge, was now considered a subset of electromagnetic warfare. Inside defense circles, discussions had shifted from merely harnessing lightning to mastering the full electromagnetic spectrum. Lasers, microwave beams, and charged particle weapons were on the table. Skyfire's copper wires were now seen as primitive. If lightning could be triggered with wires, perhaps it could be summoned remotely, wirelessly, through atmospheric resonance. At the same time, strange notations began to appear in unrelated technical documents. Reports on radar scattering referred to deliberate atmospheric ionization. Weather balloons were launched not to measure storm systems, but to map the conductivity of high-altitude charge layers. The connection was clear to those who knew what to look for. Project Skyfire hadn't ended. It had gone black. Then, in 1976, something unexpected happened. The United Nations passed the Environmental Modification Convention, a treaty banning the hostile use of environmental engineering in warfare. It specifically referenced techniques that could alter weather patterns, earthquakes, and ocean currents. The US signed it, so did the Soviet Union. The message to the world was simple. The superpowers had agreed not to weaponize nature. But there was a problem. The treaty banned the use of weather modification. It said nothing about research. Behind the scenes, work continued. Former Skyfire personnel were reassigned. Some moved into private aerospace firms. Others appeared on rosters linked to newly classified programs. The name Skyfire disappeared entirely. In its place came vague euphemisms: atmospheric coupling, field resonance enhancement, induced charge vectors. The idea was no longer to guide a single bolt. It was to alter the behavior of the sky itself. And then, in the 1980s, the patents began. Filed under obscure energy corporations and anonymous inventors, these technical diagrams describe devices capable of manipulating ionospheric charge, focusing electrical potential, and even triggering localized weather phenomena. Most were dismissed as speculative, but insiders recognized the lineage. The devices described were logical extensions of Skyfire's earliest principles, refined, upgraded, and now unconstrained by public oversight. There were whispers of live tests, remote deserts, storm systems that behaved unnaturally, reports of lightning storms that moved against prevailing winds, anomalies dismissed by meteorologists but noted by defense analysts. In one instance, a bolt struck an isolated power substation in Nevada, despite clear skies in all directions. It fried the transformers, melted the circuit boards, and left no clear cause. Officially, it was recorded as a freak discharge. Unofficially, it was logged as a probable test. In parallel, theoretical papers emerged, exploring how electromagnetic fields could be used to create pre-ionized corridors in the atmosphere, channels through which lightning could be guided without physical wires. The idea was to sculpt the sky with invisible lines and then summon charge to follow the path. Lightning on demand, with no infrastructure required. By the end of the decade, Project Skyfire had transformed from a fire prevention tool into the seed of something far more expansive: the weaponization of weather, atmosphere, and energy. And it was only just beginning. While the world looked to the stars, a network of antennas rose in Alaska. Officially, it was called the High Frequency Active Auroral Research Program, HAARP. Built in the early 1990s and operated by the U.S. Air Force, Navy, and the University of Alaska, HAARP was said to be a research facility studying the behavior of the ionosphere. But to those who traced the threads from earlier decades, it was something more. The same principles that underpin Project Skyfire, control of high-energy atmospheric charge, now had a new laboratory, not beneath clouds, but above them, not with wires, but with frequency. HAARP's main instrument was the Ionospheric Research Instrument, an array of 180 antennas capable of transmitting 3.6 megawatts of power into the upper atmosphere. To the untrained eye, it was just a field of metal poles, but its output could heat small, controlled regions of the ionosphere, bending and disturbing the very fabric of the sky. Supporters called it harmless. Skeptics saw something else: the realization of Skyfire's second phase. Where Skyfire had aimed to guide lightning, HAARP could energize whole portions of the ionosphere, creating conditions under which lightning, storms, or even electromagnetic pulses might be triggered or disrupted. The mechanism was different. The ambition remained. By sending high-frequency radio waves upward, HAARP could create artificial auroras, proof that it could inject energy into the magnetosphere and change how charged particles behaved. But there were deeper tests, never openly acknowledged. Rumors swirled that HAARP was used to temporarily suppress radio communication over test zones, that it had the capacity to deflect radar, bend signals, or interfere with satellite transmissions. The military, when asked, denied weaponization. The documents told a more nuanced story. Buried in HAARP's early white papers were references to dual-use potential. Scientists admitted that ionospheric heating could, in theory, be used to generate ELF waves, useful not only for submarine communication, but for penetrating deep into the Earth's crust. Other documents speculated on the use of these waves to influence atmospheric pressure systems. The language was always careful, theoretical, conditional, but the implications were clear. Skyfire's evolution was now airborne. In 1997, a former Secretary of Defense stood before Congress and warned that future wars might involve weather as a force multiplier, that storms could be guided, that droughts could be engineered, that natural disasters could, one day, be made to happen. He did not name HAARP. He didn't need to. Across the Atlantic, the European Parliament demanded an investigation into HAARP's capabilities, citing fears of weaponized weather and unexplained atmospheric phenomena. Their resolution called for oversight, transparency, and civilian monitoring. The United States ignored the request. At the same time, in scientific circles, talk of geoengineering became fashionable. Research papers explored stratospheric aerosol injection to reflect sunlight and cool the planet. Others examined cloud brightening to manipulate regional rainfall. It was environmental science on the surface. But beneath it, Skyfire's logic persisted, that nature could be modified not just by emissions, but by intent. Commercial patents emerged for ground-based ion generators, cloud-seeding drones, and atmospheric resonance devices. Their applications were framed in benign terms: agricultural optimization, hail suppression, fog dispersion. But the underlying tech aligned too closely with prior military experiments to be coincidence. By the early 2000s, a web of programs, facilities, and private initiatives had formed, each contributing to a quiet shift in how humanity engaged with the sky. The shift was never declared. It didn't need to be. 1,000 independent efforts, each cloaked in plausible deniability, had begun altering the environment with purpose. And when the environment responds with chaos, who can say what was natural? As public scrutiny of HAARP grew, the narrative shifted again. In 2014, the military announced it would transfer operations to the University of Alaska and shut down funding. Some hailed it as a victory. Others saw it as camouflage. The antennas remained. The technology remained. And HAARP, as a concept, had already spread. In the years that followed, private corporations began launching satellites equipped with microwave and RF capabilities. Officially, they were for communications. But many of the frequencies used had dual potential, both for signal transmission and for atmospheric interference. Independent analysts noted that some satellites had unusual power sources or orbital behaviors inconsistent with standard telecom architecture. Then came the anomalies: localized lightning clusters in regions without storm conditions, sudden shifts in jet streams during key military operations, hurricanes that stalled in place for days, exhibiting pressure patterns that defied meteorological models. No agency claimed responsibility. No investigation ever produced certainty. But in the intelligence world, patterns matter more than proof. Whistleblowers added fuel to the fire. One former defense contractor described a system that used ground stations to tune the atmosphere before a targeted event. Another leaked blueprints of a platform capable of coupling ionospheric activity with satellite-based dispersal. Both were dismissed as unreliable. Both had their records sealed within months. Meanwhile, HAARP's global cousins multiplied. Facilities in Norway, Russia, and China emerged, each with capabilities mirroring or exceeding HAARP's original design. Some were openly declared as ionospheric research stations. Others operated in silence, their funding unclear, their purpose unstated. The weaponization of the sky had become a decentralized project, no longer bound to a single nation, no longer accountable to any treaty. And through it all, the legacy of Skyfire endured. It was not a single weapon, nor a single project. It was a philosophy that weather is no longer beyond influence, that the atmosphere is not sacrosanct, that lightning, once a symbol of divine wrath, can be repurposed for strategy. As the second decade of the 21st century began, the infrastructure for climate influence was in place. Drones, satellites, antennas, and algorithms all coordinated in quiet synchrony. The tools of control no longer looked like weapons. They looked like systems, and the systems were watching the sky. As the architecture for environmental manipulation matured, the final phase of Skyfire's evolution emerged, not in labs or weather stations, but in orbit. Throughout the 2010s and into the 2020s, dozens of new satellites were launched into low Earth orbit by both state and private entities. They bore names like Project Loon, Starlink, and Skynet. Not references to fiction, but real operational networks of aerial hardware. On the surface, these constellations promised internet access, navigation, and global connectivity. But for those tracking the lineage of atmospheric control, the patterns told a different story. Many of these platforms carried more than communication payloads. They bore high-frequency transmitters, phased array antennas, and power systems capable of modulating electromagnetic fields. Their altitude, between 300 and 1,200 kilometers, placed them within optimal range for interacting with the upper atmosphere and the ionosphere, and their coverage was global. Now, for the first time in history, the infrastructure to project influence anywhere on the planet from orbit had become reality. It no longer required HAARP-like arrays or copper wires trailing from weather rockets. The new tools were invisible, constant, and above reproach. In official documents, their purpose remained classified or obfuscated. But patent filings, leaked procurement contracts, and telemetry logs hinted at capabilities far beyond internet provision. A growing number of analysts noted strange correlations. Weather anomalies followed satellite passes. Regions under certain orbital tracks experienced persistent cloud formation, electromagnetic disruptions, or localized lightning activity. Independent meteorologists recorded atmospheric pressure drops coinciding with satellite clusters traversing storm systems. No single data point confirmed the suspicion, but taken together, they formed a mosaic of quiet intervention. Then came the patents. Over 170 separate filings emerged between 2000 and 2023, all referencing weather modification, ionospheric manipulation, and electromagnetic control. Some described ground-based systems, others detailed orbital arrays. Their language was often buried in technical jargon. Geo-effective plasma seeding, localized RF coupling, atmospheric heating arrays. But their meaning was unmistakable. The weapons of the new age would not explode. They would resonate. There were no bombs, no missiles, no fingerprints, only patterns of drought in one region, flooding in another, disrupted harvests, and economic destabilization. To the public, they were acts of nature. To those watching the skies, they were signals. In 2005, Hurricane Katrina devastated New Orleans. Years later, analysts discovered anomalies in the storm's behavior, sudden changes in barometric pressure, inexplicable directional shifts, and storm path corrections that aligned with military flight corridors. No definitive proof emerged, but internal reports from foreign intelligence services flagged the storm as probable modification. Again, the data was circumstantial, but the implications loomed large. The possibility that weather, once the final uncontrollable variable, was now a tool of statecraft and subversion transformed the geopolitical landscape. What had begun as fire prevention had become atmospheric supremacy. Governments around the world responded quietly. New research labs opened in the Arctic Circle and Antarctic Plateau, far from civilian eyes. Balloon networks launched under the guise of atmospheric sampling. Research vessels deployed equipment capable of high-altitude charge release and stratospheric aerosol injection. All were described as climate research, none invited inspection, and amid this proliferation, public discourse remained decades behind. Most people still imagined weather control as science fiction. They viewed lightning as random, hurricanes as acts of nature, and droughts as environmental consequence. Few understood the extent to which the technology had evolved, and fewer still grasped the implications that by altering the sky, one could alter societies. Electric grids, crop cycles, communication systems, all could be disrupted through seemingly natural events. Entire economies could be kneecapped, populations displaced, elections influenced not through propaganda, but through pressure systems. The battlefield had expanded beyond borders, but there was a deeper danger, the possibility of miscalculation. As more actors gained access to atmospheric influence, states, corporations, and even non-state entities, the sky became a contested domain. The same unpredictability that made weather a challenge now made weaponized climate a liability. Interventions in one hemisphere echoed in another. Cloud seeding in one region could deprive another of rain. Heat induction could shift jet streams, and the feedback loops were poorly understood. No international treaty governed this new warfare. No agency tracked the interventions, and no doctrine had yet been written for atmospheric retaliation. What had begun as a spark, Skyfire, was now a storm of human design. Even now, in the present day, traces of the original project persist. Declassified memos from the 1960s reference technologies that modern systems now implement without acknowledgement. The copper wires of early tests evolved into radio frequency corridors, the rocket trails into satellite vectors, the lightning bolts into precision energy delivery. Skyfire had succeeded, not as a single device, but as an idea, that the elements themselves could be programmed. And yet, the public record remains quiet. Few textbooks discuss the history of lightning manipulation. Meteorological science seldom mentions engineered weather, and mainstream narratives continue to place atmospheric phenomena beyond human control. But in military archives, in unredacted briefings, and in the whispers of those who once worked in sealed laboratories, the story is known. Project Skyfire was not abandoned, it was perfected. And above our heads, beyond clouds and beyond accountability, the systems hum. They wait, they watch, and when the order comes, they strike at the speed of light and in silence. Welcome to the Forbidden Index.